How do you tell another man or even anybody that you were physically abused by a woman? It was a difficult thing, mentally.
Welcome to the Moving Humanity Forward podcast. My name is Kathy Malajani, and every week we look to have conversations that will inspire you, that will show you resilience, and that will share some success stories for you. Now, the plan always is to have trailblazers, vision makers, as well as change makers share their story and hopefully inspire you to take your next step in your journey of life. Now, our guest is one we've had previously. He wears so many hats. I think I like the idea of him introducing himself and just sharing the hats that he wears. I think last time we spoke, he even forgot some of the hats that he wore. I'm fortunate enough to look at him as an older brother. He goes by the name Grandmaster Scott. Grandmaster, welcome once again. Thank you for joining us, and please take us through the hats that you wear.
Thank you once again, Kathy, for having me. Again, as you mentioned, Grandmaster Scott is what I go by. Currently, I'm the founder of the International Kung Fu and Healing Center, Botswana. I'm also the African continent president of the International Chinese Martial Arts Federation here, and member of the Shaolin Lohan Therapeutic Institute of China. So that's just, a few of the hats I wear. I won't go into details because of time.
Many other hats, acting, voiceovers, many other hats. Even when you look at the healing, acupuncture, meditation, Tai Chi.
Yes, ma'am.
The list is quite extensive. But we did have you in conversation last week, and I think it's a conversation was necessary. We needed to continue. There are a couple of questions that also came in, and I'd like you to just speak to those. And one of the things we spoke about as we closed off our conversation, you had mentioned the fact that you think men need to be the ones at the forefront of the fight against GBV. And I think one of the questions that came through was just saying, when should we bringing men into this fight against gender-based violence? And one of the other questions also is, you had touched a little bit on just the fact that we need more mentorship for boys, because a lot of the time we see women empowerment being talked about. We see, a push for more girls and ICT, girls in, certain spaces, and it almost feels as if the boy child is left behind. So I think that's where I'd like us to start off with, because that was one of the questions, to say, how do we mentor boys to be better? So let's start it off with that, to say, do you think there's a bit of a gap in terms of the boy child versus the girl child?
Oh, yeah, definitely. And the gap is across the board, not only starting from home, but it also, you see the same gap in schools, the same gap in church, the same gaps in society, the same gaps in our interpersonal relationships with one another. Definitely a gap, because the emphasis has always been on the young ladies, the girls, that type of stuff. So we really need to kind of change the dynamics and focus more on young men and boys. Definitely.
Now, one of the things that I think cuts across culture is just this thinking or saying that boys don't cry. So I'd like you to share a little bit about that, because I think that was your experience as well.
Yeah.
And there's actually a poem that you were sort of, picking a couple of stanzas from. So if you don't mind, please share that with us.
I will, at your request. The poem is by American author Langston Hughes, and it's entitled "A Man He Don't Cry." And I'll just recite just briefly the opening stanza. As he stumbled and fell for the second time, the toddler got up and looked up at his tall Dada and screwed up his face. Dada waved a thick black finger in his face and said, son, a man, he don't cry. A man, he don't cry. And I think that's where we are across the nation, across the world, and in our own personal lives. With that stereotype about men not showing emotions, not supposed to show emotions. You have to be tough. You have to be resilient, and not deal with those issues, those emotional issues, which has led to a whole wealth of issues in terms of dealing with men's mental health from a young age. As young boys, we're taught a man doesn't cry. We're supposed to suck it up and keep going. But we know now, of course, that's not the case. We're humans as well, too.
And I do want us to tie that in a little bit later on as we speak, because I think, like you're saying, that leads to a plethora of issues, and we could really just avoid it by teaching boys to cry. So it's good to cry, let go of
Nothing
those
wrong.
emotions.
I'll be the first to say I'm a big old crybaby.
And we'll talk about why that's important. But for now, I'd like you to just take me through in terms of the mentorship that you think is important. Maybe share your experience as well in terms of your dad, your mentors.
Yeah, mentorship is really important, especially in a young man's life. For example, my biological father, he passed away when I was really young, taken away from us, an untimely death due to cancer. Again, was in the military, Vietnam War. But that left my mother raising 5 kids in the neighborhood by herself. And in the immediate nuclear family, I was the only boy. So fortunately, we had role models during that time and in our community and society, role models who came from, some of them were my father's military comrades. Some of them were educators at the school. Some of them were relatives, uncles, that type of stuff. Some of them were church members, strong pastors and deacons in the church community that I came from. So I was fortunate in the fact that I had really, really good mentors and really, really good role models helping me as a young man to grow up and understand certain things. That and the teachings of a very strong Caribbean mother who didn't let me slack, and also taught me those things relevant to being a young man and how a woman is supposed to be respected and treated. Because again, I had 4 other sisters in my nuclear family. I have 7 sisters altogether, the 4 in the nuclear family, plus my mother at the time, and I was the only boy. So that got pounded into my head as to how you're supposed to treat and act towards women, which is, I don't think, is really being taught at homes or in schools or period anymore.
So we then take it from there, Grandmaster, to I think one of the questions that basically says, when should we bring men into the forefront of the fight? When do you think that should happen?
Like 2 years ago, yesterday, is that should have happened immediately. Women should no longer, as I mentioned in the first half of the segment, be on the forefront championing causes for gender-based violence. It must be us, because statistically, women are the ones who mostly are the victims of gender-based violence, of violence against them perpetrated by men. So women shouldn't be marching and going to awareness saying, hey guys, can you stop hitting me? Can you stop? We need to have enough, because every guy here came through a woman, period, full stop. Everybody here has mothers. Some of us have spouses, girlfriends, aunts, nieces, sisters. We should be the champions. We should be the stalwarts and the spearheads and the vanguards on this fight against GBV. We should hold one another accountable.
Well, there you have it. We're going to continue this conversation in just a short while. Don't you go anywhere. And remember to please like our pages, MHF Podcast on Facebook. Otherwise, you can find us on YouTube as well as on TikTok, Moving Humanity Forward Podcast. We'll be right back. This is Moving Humanity Forward, and we're still in conversation with Grandmaster Scott. And we're talking about gender-based violence. And I think a lot of the time the statistics show us that it's women who are mostly affected, but we cannot take away from the fact that there are men who survive gender-based violence. And Grandmaster Scott, I think people will find it hard to believe, especially given your size. I think we always believe that these things cannot happen to somebody who, A, can take care of themselves. You are a martial artist. And of course, just the fact that growing up on the streets, I can imagine you had to have a certain level of street smart.
Yes, ma'am.
That said, you did experience gender-based violence.
I did.
Take us through it.
It happened, of course, as a young adult. Just backstory. Again, as I mentioned, coming from an environment where I had sisters and my mom there, and my father dying, I was taught, this is how you treat a woman. This is how you respect them. With my sisters, it never hit a woman. So fast forward, and that's something that stuck in my head. Almost like a mantra. This is how you never hit women. Never hit women. So I was involved with a young lady, and the things were great as young love goes, and it happens. But the relationship began to sour when I realized that she was a verbal antagonist, and of course, those of you who aren't aware, um, verbal antagonism too is a form of abuse, because it became emotional, it became mental, even though the physicality wasn't there at the time. It progressed into that. So that abuse had started um, early in the relationship, actually. But again, being the dutiful boyfriend that I was at the time, and making sure my lady was taken care of, she decided to ask me for money at one point in time to go, I think, shopping with cousins after excursion, and I told her no. And from that point, oh my goodness, it hit the fan. It all fell apart from there, and it became.
Wait, so she hit you at that point?
Yeah. I was slapped in the face at the time. I took it with a grain of salt, because slapping me is like, okay, fine, maybe you had an off day, and again, I'm at work when this happened, and I was from behind my workstation and went out to my vehicle to talk and speak in the moment that I did it. But things progressed and progressed, and it got increasingly worse. Not only did the verbal antagonism continue, again, the hitting first, there was a slap.
Wait, I need to pause you.
Yes, ma'am.
Were you aware at that point that this was abuse?
No.
You thought this was,
I'm
we
thinking,
make
okay,
up and
maybe.
break up.
Yeah, and of course, again, living with my sisters and everything, I thought maybe it was a time of the month issue, uh, even going through that. But it began to happen so frequently, red flags kind of went up, and this is where it gets difficult, because when you have love in a one-sided relationship, you can't see wrong in people, even though it's wrong. The behavior that's happening is wrong.
Yeah.
The way that you're being treated is incorrect, but you still sticking it out. You still making it because you care for that person so much, even more than yourself. So you stick in there and you hang in there, but the abuse continued. Even one time, I remember we were coming from the airport, and I just picked up my martial arts teacher from the international airport, and she went off in the car while he was in the back seat and hit me in front of my teacher. And I looked at his expression in the rear view mirror, and he just kind of held his head like this here, uttered something in Chinese, and shook his head like, Lord have mercy, my student is going through this. And I know him, and I know what he's capable of, but he still didn't do anything. Very, very embarrassing. But it culminated.
Did you tell anyone about this?
I didn't. As a man, who do you tell? And that's another big stereotype and stigma that we have. But my colleagues from work, I was in the hotel industry, because that's what I do. I'm a hotelier by trade. Can you imagine going to work, showing up with black eyes and busted lips and what have you? I literally stopped by my sister's flat on the way to work, and just to get base and makeup,
so your
and
sisters
rouge.
knew something?
Yeah,
was wrong?
They knew, and they just, why are you still with this girl? Why are you still with her? Of course, I didn't say, yeah, I want to say I love her, but I knew it was wrong, and then my sisters there too knew it was wrong also. But then going to the hotel and being in the front desk, facing guests and wearing glasses, and my coworkers questioning is, man, what happened to you? And they knew I was into martial arts, and I'd be jesting, oh man, we got a little roughed in training this weekend. How do you tell another man or even anybody that you were physically abused by a woman? It was a difficult thing, mentally trying to keep that all together, because that's, again, we go back to the Langston Hughes poem, "A Man He Don't Cry."
Mm.
So who do you cry to? And it was a difficult time, Kathy, trying to keep all that together and crying silently. I know what it's like. Crying internally, I know what it's like.
Mm. So you didn't report it. It
No.
got worse. It got more frequent. I want to imagine maybe it got more violent. What brought it to an end?
I think probably what brought it to an end was me just realizing that this wasn't going anywhere, and it's better for me to walk away before it escalated into something that was going to be detrimental for us both. At least I had that much sense about me to realize this isn't a relationship. This isn't love. This went on for almost 4 years. Yeah, 4 years with this happening, and it was really a difficult thing. And I think probably the culmination you just mentioned, and I won't go into detail here, is a bit sordid. The last altercation we had was at church, while I'm in church trying to get my praise and worship on, and she slapped me in the pews while I'm sitting there. Yeah, it was very embarrassing. Church members looking, and we ended up outside, and other things took place. But yeah, I knew then, this is not for me. Let me relieve myself from this. So I had the sense enough to walk away. Was it painful? Of course it was painful, because I still cared for her. You understand? But I cared for me more. And it's just a thing that you have to think about. But it's something that, again, from a male's perspective, we don't really deal with in society. Who do we go to as men? Because now it becomes a mental health issue. As an adult, it was difficult to process. I can imagine if these type of things were happening in the household with younger men, babies and boys, preteen boys, young guys in 6, 7, 8 years old, seeing this type of behavior exhibited between mom and dad, a mom and the boyfriend, and this type of stuff. What is it doing to the mentality and psyche of that young man? And we'll talk more here in just a minute about steps that we can take to deal with this and nip it on the bud in the early stages.
I actually would like you to speak to a man who's going through this, whether it has progressed, because it looks like it progresses. And I think, we were talking off camera to say a lot of the time, because women talk a lot, right? Sometimes it can end up being abusive, and it's verbal. And because it's verbal, I think maybe they don't know. And then it becomes emotional, it becomes mental, and so on and so forth. So I'd actually like you to speak to a man who might be going through this and just advise him, especially having gone through it, and then how many years later now being involved so very much in the Huntze movement, where you're trying to say we need to stop gender-based violence. I'm trying to teach women self-defense skills so that should they end up in a position where they need to defend themselves and make sure they don't end up unalive, as we say.
Yeah, unalive.
Right? So please just speak to a man who might be in this situation and advise him.
Well, first of all, we have to understand too that women by nature, and usually most of the time, are the ones who are verbal antagonists, for the simple fact we're built differently. Physiology is different. Men are physically stronger than women. Women, believe it or not, guys, are mentally stronger than we are. So if you can't beat the guy physically, then what do? You hit his ego. You hit his ego, you demean him in all type of ways. You're not this and you're not that. And then there's comparison for this. And we know the drill and how it goes. But I will say this to men: if you find yourself in situations like this, then it's difficult sometimes to analyze it and understand it when you're in the midst of the situation, when you're in the midst of all of the trial and tribulation and the trauma. You should when you can, if you can, take that step to say, hey, this is not healthy for either one of us. And it really takes effort because we're built differently. So we're stronger mentally than others are. You know, try to find accountability partners. Whatever you do, don't engage in fisticuffs. Don't engage in physical altercation because in the end, both people are going to lose. She's going to lose because she's going to end up in the hospital, or even worse, unalived, as we say. You're going to lose because then you end up incarcerated for the rest of your life, or on charges and messed up your life. So there's no winners in this. So it's best just to walk away. I don't care if you're staying at her house. If you're staying at her house, guys, walk away.
But that's
Get
hard.
away.
That's hard, Grandmaster.
Of
You
course
just
it
said
is.
you're still in love with this person. You care about this person, which is why you're in this relationship in the first place. And then you're saying walk away.
Mm-hmm.
But I love her.
Stick your finger in your mouth and bite down on it as hard as you can. Tell me how long is it going to take before you take the finger out your mouth to relieve the pain. It sounds crazy, but we have to be like that. Like I mentioned, it wasn't easy for me to get out of that situation because, heart emotion was in it. You know, feelings was in it.
Yeah. And
some people may be able to overcome a situation like that faster than somebody else, but definitely don't go through it by yourself. Talk to a female relative, talk to a male relative if you have one, and just be honest. This is the situation. This is how it is. I love her, but she is a verbal and you have to know, guys, the difference and understand abuse. Verbal abuse is abuse as well. That type of antagonism is abuse because nobody should have that mental anguish that they have to deal with on a day-to-day basis. And enough is enough. Pressure can even burst a water pipe. So if you keep pushing and keep pushing, I mean, that's like picking a rhino in the backside with a stick, and you don't expect for him to turn around. That's not fair. That's not the type of partner that you need or want in life. And just start over. It's easier to do that than the outcome. I don't want to see anybody with a negative outcome in it, her or him.
I love what Grandmaster is saying. You love this person, but you need to love yourself that much more. So listen in. We'll continue this conversation in just a bit. This is the Moving Humanity Forward podcast. Welcome back. This is the Moving Humanity Forward podcast. And speaking about gender-based violence, I want us now to redirect the conversation to the ways that we can assist with regards to especially how boys can be mentored. I think one of the first things I want to just get to understand is how do we identify verbal abuse? Because we've said a lot of the time a man will get verbally abused before he gets physically abusive. So perhaps if we can get a man to identify what verbal abuse is so that they know, no, this is wrong. I probably should try and get help for this situation before it escalates into something bigger and worse.
Yes, ma'am.
So what is it?
Again, verbal abuse happens in a lot of different ways, but just off the top of my head, using words to make somebody feel less than themselves, to dehumanize you, to take away your dignity or your sense of self-respect. With men, to be verbally emasculated and attacking your manhood and your masculinity, hidden ego, whether it's, hey, you don't make enough money, you're not that good in bed, you're too fat, you're overweight, you don't drive the right car, you don't make enough money. These type of things are hurtful, very hurtful. So these are just a few examples, and I hope it doesn't get any more critical than that. These are just a few examples of verbal abuse and being verbally antagonistic from female to male, especially if these things are happening on a frequent basis. You know, if that's the only way she has learned to communicate displeasure, by being a verbal antagonist, that's not it, because there's ways to communicate this, and she might be right with everything she said, but how you communicate it is most important. So you also have to know those triggers. If you can't talk to me any better than that, if we don't know how to communicate any better than that without making me feel less of a human being, then it becomes a problem. Now we have to learn how to communicate.
I want to get to perhaps how you deal with it when it has gotten to that level. But before we do, in our last conversation, you mentioned certain issues that I think are very important to bring up, and that is that of conflict resolution as well as anger management. I think they do tie in exactly to what we're talking about. So, what are some of the things that we need to be bearing in mind, and what are the lessons that especially men who have been taught don't have emotions, don't express your emotions, it's not cool to have emotions? How do they then now need to be factoring in as a level of or a certain conflict resolution in the anger management?
Yeah, well, first, going back again to that poem by Langston Hughes, "A Man He Don't Cry," the anger management, conflict resolution. To resolve a conflict, the answer is in what it is: conflict resolution,
Yeah.
anger management. How do you manage that? If somebody has offended me or made me feel less than myself, and it has made me angry, how do I manage that anger? How do I manage that feeling? Do I strike out physically? Do I walk away? Do I go to a corner and take a time out? Do I do a couple of woosahs? Do I drink herbal tea? What? Managing that anger. And then through the anger management, once you've learned to manage the anger, then the second half of that, how do we resolve the conflict amicably and like two adults? Because back and forth, fussing and fussing, it serves no purpose. It's a waste of time. It's negative energy. And eventually, one partner or the other is going to get tired of that. So now, especially if you're in a closed environment like home, and you have a captive audience, and women are bad about having that captive audience. So he's off from work. He's at home now. He's here. I'm gonna hit him with all this negative stuff. Just walk away. It's a difficult thing, but these are learned responses and learned solutions that we have to even start thinking about, even when we find ourselves in what we think is a healthy relationship. We have to be honest with ourselves and put ourselves in what if scenarios. Hopefully it doesn't get like that. But the more you practice and the more you understand and the more you create comfortable spaces for people to communicate, then I can effectively manage anger. Then I can effectively have conflict resolution that doesn't blow up past any more verbal abuse and hopefully not into physical abuse.
So let's tie these in together. You identified that this is now abuse. And perhaps I think I wanted to ask, how do you know when it's just, we're disagreeing versus now, okay, this is now abuse? I think you said if it happens so very frequently, that can be a big one to say, no, this is. So I'm in that position. I'm in this relationship, but I'm being abused. What should I do? What can I do?
Well, a lot of time red flags come up, especially if you've been in a situation before and been in even a verbally abusive relationship. Those red flags go up soon as a new partner or potential partner exhibits any type of behavior like the previous one. I've had enough, and I get that. It's always that fight or flight or that escape mechanism that we have inherent within us all to do that. But being able to identify these triggers is a difficult thing. You really have to know yourself. First thing, you have to know yourself as well as knowing your partner. A lot of us don't know ourselves, and because of it, we don't know how much we're capable of taking, how much we're capable of enduring until we're pushed to the limit, until we're pushed to the limit of endurance, until we're pushed to the limit of I can't take it no more. And then we realize, nope, that was too much. I snapped, and here it is. We should, first of all, know ourselves and know our limits and know how much we're willing to put up with. And if it's zero tolerance, let it be zero tolerance. I would rather have it like that than for two people to get into a relationship and it builds it. Nothing's going to be perfect in a relationship. Everything is going to be trial and error sometime. Some days are going to be rosier than others, but communication is the key. I should be able, as a man, to express myself, even cry. Honey, what you said really hurt my feelings. Without being judgmental and without being, you're a man, suck it up. You're supposed to deal with it. You're not allowed to be like that. You're a punk, you're being too feminine. No, I have a heart. What you said hurt. And I need you to know that it hurt me. Can you please not do that again? And sometimes when you come across with that softer emotion, instead of coming across with the one that maybe she expects to happen, trying to solicit a certain response from you to get certain things to happen, it sometimes cools it. Even the Bible tells us that a calm word turns away wrath. And we have to get into the habit of taking that woosah, dealing with the situation and saying, okay, let me deal with it like this. Honey, what you said was hurtful. It hurt my feelings. Can you try not to do it again? And then watch the responses behind that. And then if it continues to happen and happen, then obviously red flags and whistles, bells start going off and think maybe this is something that's not healthy for us.
Okay, so I want to get you to just speak a little bit now to mentorship, right? I think you've touched on what should you do in that situation. So now, how do we turn back time, right? And perhaps now try and do better for the next generation. How do we mentor our boy child to better deal with this? And again, we want to point out that a lot of the time it's because the statistics will show that the perpetrators of gender-based violence are mostly men, right? Not that men don't don't experience this, they do. But unfortunately, a lot of the time, I think you will agree with me, other men don't report it, or a lot of the time there's no evidence. And I think that goes both ways though. But that said, let's see, if you had a wish list, if you had a magic wand and you were able to say, what can we do for our boys now to avoid these situations happening later? What would some of those things be?
It would be to mentor them while they're young, from creche reception, that old. Start putting them into situations where you can explain to them, no, son, this is wrong. Yes, son, this is right. This is how you should do it. And kids will be kids. You're gonna have that terrible age with toddlers and everything. But then again, a firm hand with love, you can do that. But again, mentoring these young men and helping them to understand and appreciate this, this is a woman, this is a man. We're different, but we're the same at the same time. And just letting them know this is how she should be treated. This is how she should be protected. This is how it will be in relations. And you can even whittle it down to situations between siblings. Okay, you have a sister. This is how your sister acts. Why does she act like this? Why does she do that? And young men will start talking because I've experienced this in my martial arts program. I also have teens and younger ones in there. And these are some of the things that we talk about too. So I'm speaking from experience, from listening and soliciting questions and conversations from them, helping them to appreciate these type of things. So definitely mentorship on that. And it has to be something that's kept up all the time. Identifying programs in the community locally who are already in place who do that type of mentorship, whether it's ministry to men's in churches, whether it's independent groups like Men and Boys for Gender Equality. The thing we have to do is always follow up. I'm currently part of a large group here in Habarani, Gender United Against Gender-Based Violence, and it's a group of different community stakeholders, and we all agree that this year's agenda and this year's programming should be an outreach towards young men, helping them to overcome issues with conflict resolution, anger management, and expressing themselves in a non-violent way. And if you can nip it in the bud like this, and then benchmarking too, we're looking into to identifying a specific school, and then working with the headmasters and people at that school, and following this group of young men from point A to point B even into higher education at senior secondary, and benchmarking the progress of this particular set of young men, more or less as a control group, looking at it. And then, of course, going in throughout the country, reproducing this with a few tweaks and what have you, based on a community, to try to make a difference in the lives of young men. And then, of course, the community from older gentlemen, it's the same thing. We all need love. Guys, we're here at this level. We don't cry. We've been taught not to show emotions. It's okay to cry. It's okay to, even if you're crying in your beer, it's it's okay
Let
to
me
cry.
ask you this, Grandmaster. Can you speak to somebody who, I want to say at this point, is almost annoyed because there is a double standard, if I can put it that way, especially when we're talking gender-based violence, where it's almost as if we always paint the women as the victim, but we know that is not the case. Is there a way that we can, we were speaking to someone off air earlier who was like, is there no way we can put fear inside the woman so that she knows, in the same way that we as men are taught that you can't beat a woman? Isn't there a way that we can teach women not to do this, not to be verbally antagonistic or abusive, not, to know there's some consequences? What can we do about that?
Maybe excellent question. Maybe from an adult level, it may be quote unquote too late, because as we develop into adults, we have our own minds and ideas and what we want to do and what we're not going to take or take. Again, using that same dynamic, going back to young girls, also teaching them anger management and conflict resolution and these type of things, and taking a group of those young ladies as well as young men and benchmarking them and the progress as they progress, because we all know, because of the sexes, everybody, young ladies mature faster than young men. So it's something that we have to get a hold of. In terms of consequences, that's a difficult one, because you don't want people to strike out in violence, male or female. And as I mentioned before, I was being a victim of not a victim, a survivor, a survivor of GBV in that situation. It's a difficult thing. And I'm glad I didn't strike out physically to do it, because again, my life could have been changed dramatically from doing it. So this is a multi-layered, multifaceted thing that needs everybody in the community's attention, and we must follow up. We can't start a program and then just leave it there for the sake of saying this is something I've done, and that's, we have to benchmark. We have to follow up. Each one teach one. We are brothers and sisters keepers.
I want to close off our conversation with you giving us a conclusion, and then just perhaps painting the picture of what it is that is happening currently. We've got these men who've been taught, don't speak, don't express your emotions. And then you've got the woman who's verbally antagonistic. It just seems like an explosion waiting to happen. Can you speak to that and then close off our conversation?
It is the only thing I can think of is what has helped me in this prayer. A firm belief in God and his promises for me, and understanding the dynamics in the relationship between the sexes, between the spouses or the girlfriends or potential mates, and understanding that everybody has their own comfort zones, and everybody should respect one another's humanity and dignity. And when it gets to a point where there's back and forth and banter back and forth, hurtful banter, sometimes you have to dig into it and find out why do you feel hurtful? And usually it's a simple issue or a simple problem. Well, you didn't do X, Y, Z, and I didn't do. Well, honey, okay, did you have to deal with it through fussing and arguing because the things you said was hurtful? Because if you continue to do it, as women do, continue to be verbal antagonists, as they have 7 sisters, so I know what I'm talking about. As they continue to be verbal antagonists, we as men have to understand that, and understand that that's a trigger, and understand that quite a few of them do that. We have to know it, understand it, and discipline ourselves to walk away. Honey, I understand you're upset right now. I get it. But for the sake of calming down, for the sake of not exploding, and this being a bigger thing, that I'm going to be a bigger person. Let me go outside in the yard. Let me go walk down the street. Let me do whatever. I'm okay. I'll be back. we can discuss this at a later time. And yeah, you still have some, no, we're going to discuss this now. Come back here when I'm talking to you. It's a problem. Still walk away. Walk away. That's all I can say. Because the end result can be detrimental for both. And it's not worth it. It's not worth it. That moment of anger could change lives forever.
And that's how we're going to close off this conversation. We love solutions to the issues, and you'll know Botswana's GBV statistics continue to get higher every single year. So we'd love to hear what your take is on the conversation we've been having. We'd love to know your solutions to some of these issues. So do hit us up, MHF Podcast on Facebook, and then Moving Humanity Forward on LinkedIn as well as YouTube, and of course TikTok. My name is Kathy Malajane. This has been a great episode with you, Grandmaster. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for having it. Thank you.